So Diane and I both are going to do it. Okay, excellent. Hi, I'm Melissa Baum, President of the League of Women Voters of Scarsdale. I'm so glad to have everyone here today. The League is a volunteer, nonpartisan political organization which promotes political responsibility through informed and active participation in government. The League is nonpartisan in that it does not support or oppose any candidate for public office. It is political and it takes positions on selected governmental issues after serious member study and consensus. We are fully committed to the principle and practice in the National League's policy on diversity, equity, and inclusion. As you may know, the League comments on local governmental processes, such as the Citizens Nonpartisan Committee election, in order to inform voters and help support the democratic process of civic engagement in Scarsdale. We are so pleased to have Becky Bach, Chair of the Procedure Committee, here with us today to discuss the election and to answer our questions and the public's questions. I will now turn over the meeting to Diane Baylor, who is the League's Village Election Portfolio Chair.
Thanks, Alyssa. For those who don't quite know, the Procedure Committee is the body that solicits candidates for the Citizens Nominating Committee and proposes amendments to the nonpartisan resolution. The Procedure Committee runs the CNC election and referendum on any amendments. And the CNC, the Citizens Nominating Committee, is the body that vets applicants and nominates a proposed slate for the Village Board of Trustees, including mayor. The nonpartisan system is entirely volunteer driven. So Becky is here as a dedicated volunteer, and we will proceed with some Q&A. There will be time for Q&A from everyone on the Zoom after I finish up with my own questions. And I encourage you to be active listeners, and we'll have a good discussion today. So thank you again for joining us, Becky, and thank you for all of your hard work in chairing the Procedure Committee this year. I should also note that Becky became chair of the Procedure Committee after serving last year as vice chair of the Procedure Committee, and that is part of the leadership transition process that ensures continued retention of institutional knowledge. So thank you again for your second year as part of the chair of the Procedure Committee. To get us started, can you tell us a little bit about the demographics that were considered as you were assembling this season's Procedure Committee, which is made up not just of the graduating class of Citizens Nominating Committee members, but a number of appointments that you can make to be involved in the recruitment and election process?
Absolutely. So the way that we solicit volunteers, or we get our population that serves on the Procedure Committee, is automatically the team that served as their third year. We call them third year graduates. They graduate from the CNC after their third term, and they are automatically on the Procedure Committee. Then there are 11 members of the Procedure Committee. We can expand to be bigger than 11, but to be a functioning committee, we're required to have 11 people serve. We recruit from interested parties who have been involved. There's a large population of people who are actually on this call that have served on the Procedure Committee in years past. I've had the honor of serving with them. We look for people from all different elementary school districts to represent the community, and how the face of the community is the Procedure Committee. And I'll just leave it right there.
Did you see any correlation between those who were on the procedure committee in terms of the demographics and those who chose to run for CNC?
Actually, no. We look to have a balanced committee, so we have representation from all different elementary school districts. But when you looked at the actual ballot of numbers of people who were recruited, who were choosing to run for the CNC, it wasn't reflective of the number of people that sat at that elementary school district versus on the ballot, if that makes any sense.
Right.
Like an example is I sit in Edgewood, right? That's where I live. And we had 3 people on the procedure committee and we had 3 people running for the CNC. If you look at Fox Meadow, we needed to fill 5 seats and we had 6 people running.
Let's talk a little bit about leadership transition now. I noticed that there were quite a number of people who have served before on the procedure committee, and particularly last year, who you were able to retain and serve again this year. And then you had a few new appointments. And of course, the entire graduating class of CNC all participated this year, all 10 of them. But you did have a vacancy in the position of vice chair that came up this year. And I was wondering what, if anything, you've done in response to that unexpected vacancy.
Yeah, without disclosing what happened there, the individual had health issues and moved out of town, right? You can't, we're living in unprecedented times. And one thing that we realized is that the procedure committee charter and our governing body doesn't account for replacement midterm, which is a recommendation that we're making to the procedure committee next year, is that we have to write that in. What we did as an interim is I appointed Madeline to cover for that vice chair position. I felt very confident in that because Madeline is coming up on this was her 4th year on the procedure committee. She's an expert in what we do. And so for each task where I needed support, Madeline would say, hey, can you deputize me? I can do this. I can help you with this. And that was very, very helpful. It was unprecedented. It's something we're going to refer back to the committee on what we should do, because this will become something that we should address next year when we're appointing the vice chair and the chair. We've already opened up dialogue with the CNC leaders, with John and Jill, on what they should be thinking about coming up to the end of January meeting, where the chair for the PC and the vice chair are usually nominated and voted on.
So is Madeline expected to succeed to the role of chair again, or do you anticipate that's going to be filled by someone else?
I anticipate it's going to be filled by somebody else, but we have to refer that back to our existing procedure committee with our recommendation. We've been very focused on getting through the election, knowing that this is the last issue that we need to solve before we reach our end of term in January.
Now, in the report that you had, there was a footnote too about the election of the procedure committee vice chair being a slight departure from what's in the resolution. And my understanding is that the resolution favors choosing someone who is not currently a 3rd year CNC member. Or even serving on the CNC at that moment. And this particular year, that's not how it played out. But I'm wondering, not about what happened this year, but what is the rationale for wanting a vice chair that does not come directly out of the CNC?
So there's consequences to every decision. I was nominated a vice chair out of the CNC, and one of the benefits to doing that is you have continuity of what's happening in the CNC. It just automatically carries over to the procedure committee. And it's an official role. You're in that role for 2 years, going from vice chair to chair. Now, the downside to that is outside opinion. So you might not get that diverse opinion or that counter argument. If everybody's been together for 3 years, you might fall subject to groupthink. And so having somebody join as vice chair that has not been part of the CNC immediately there's a benefit to that. The downside is you don't have the continuity of knowledge from what's been happening on the CNC and what rules might need to be discussed and contemplated. And the procedure committee has taken this very seriously over the last couple of years to really debate it out of where leadership should come from. And it's something that we will continue to challenge, because I don't think that there's a perfect answer. We've tried a couple different things. And so when we come into the next class for the procedure committee, we'll take it very seriously.
Thank you. So you think that might be a topic that's going to be discussed again when it's, before the next series of resolution amendments?
It will be something that we discuss before the end of our term in January, and then it's up to the next procedure committee to take that on.
Great. A question about your record keeping, and your report was very thorough in detailing all that you do, in particular that master operations manual that is now in use. There are some materials that had been on the old website, predominantly CNC materials, such as the rules of procedure, the CNC annual reports, the procedure committee recommendations to the CNC, that are not currently on the website. Do you consider those materials to be public still, or are those only for the CNC members?
The operations manual for the procedure committee, I mean, we're very open to the discussion of what that should be and what it shouldn't be. After reading it and living it for a couple of years, I think the public would be very overwhelmed with the details involved. And so I would keep that to the procedure committee of, like, these are the rules of how we operate. And it gets down to the tactics of, this is where the election boxes are stored, and this is how you set up for election day. And in this age of everybody being so overwhelmed with information, it might be too much. We're happy to open that discussion, though.
I didn't mean the operations manual to be posted, but those CNC materials, their annual reports. And I know that's not the procedures committee's work, but the materials that are on the website, does the procedure committee have a position about whether those CNC annual reports and the CNC rules of procedure, the questions to potential nominees who are seeking to serve as trustee or mayor, the application materials, and of course the procedure committee's recommendations to the CNC, are those all considered public documents?
Well, the application materials are out there. For the other ones that you have listed, I'll have to refer that back to the procedure committee to really discuss that. I can see benefits for the application and descriptions of how the procedure committee works and operates. It's slightly internal with the annual report of the details behind what happens inside the CNC. As you know, that's a very confidential setting. Everybody takes that very, very seriously. And I can see that being a very tough thing to write something that is meaningful for the public versus maintain the confidentiality.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about policies, procedures, and guidelines. This past summer, the procedure committee did a great deal of work putting together some proposed amendments that were publicized. You solicited feedback from the community, and in the end, the decision was not to move forward with a referendum on those proposed amendments. Any predictions on what will come of them this coming year?
So we did a lot of work, and it was a heavier lift. There was a heavy lift back in, I think it was 2018, where the last big cleanup of language happened for the referendum. We decided at the end of the day, end of our period of public comment, that we hadn't gotten enough public comment on what we were about to change. So we made the decision that we're going to table that, and the next procedure committee can take that work and really vet it more. We felt uncomfortable pushing something through that didn't have that discussion and consensus.
Great. Before the CNC reorganization meeting, which occurred last Monday, the procedure committee had made some recommendations that were discussed in the public portion of the meeting, including adding questions to the list that is posed to potential nominees who are applying to serve as trustees. Could you expand a little bit on what those those two questions were and what the thinking was behind it?
Sure. The questions that were discussed is basically a why are you interested, right? To get some context behind why is the person stepping forward, what's meaningful to them to serve in the capacity of trustee or mayor, depending on what year you have. And then to talk about problem solving. And the reason why we thought that why we recommend, and this is a lot of discussion and debate over the summer about which are the questions and crafting the right questions. We had a subcommittee dedicated to it. But at the end of the day, we were looking at the role of a trustee or the role of a mayor. And it would be helpful to understand their passion behind it, like why are they interested? And then for them to explain how they approached a problem using creative problem solving. Because when you look at how things are changing in Scarsdale and the role of a trustee and the influence that they have, we do see that there is a need for creative problem solving. So it would be something very helpful to have as part of the agenda and part of the conversation when you are vetting candidates.
One other thing happened at the reorganization meeting that I wanted to ask you about. During roll call, one of the CNC members indicated that he had moved to a different election district, though still owned property in the election district to which he had been elected. And the CNC chairs during the public meeting determined that that was going to be a matter to be referred to the procedure committee for a decision on whether this individual was permitted under the nonpartisan resolution to continue serving out the term when he no longer resided in the election district for which he had been elected.
Mm-hmm.
Has a determination been made at this point?
So I will refer that back to the procedure committee. It wouldn't be appropriate for me to discuss that in this forum until we're very confident that it has been resolved the way it should be, following the rules.
Fair enough. Given what happened, and without regard to this specific instance or what the determination will be, in light of what came up, are there any thoughts on implementing changes or adding something to the operations manual that would hopefully avert having a situation like this come up in the future?
I think we're we can refer back to the procedure committee, but people moving, I think we're living in a more dynamic time. 3 years is a long time for someone to, especially during the COVID situation, to say, I'm going to stay in the same district, the same house, or the same geographical area. I think we're moving away from a time when we can make those commitments. So we have to have our rules and the governing body accommodate for those type of changes. If we, for example, Fox Meadow, just bringing up that election, they had some candidates that moved out of Fox Meadow, and we opened up extra election slots to be able to fill those seats. So we have that as a precedent that we can fall back on.
Great, let's talk a little bit about the recruiting process. In your report, you indicated that you were using social media platforms, among many other efforts, to get out the recruitment messaging. Could you tell us which social media platforms you used and whether you have any plans to create a procedure committee owned social media account of any type?
So there is a nonpartisan Facebook account for the, it's not necessarily for the procedure committee, it's under the citizens nominating committee. We can take it back to the procedure committee, but personally, I don't see a need for a procedure committee account. What we had for social media in the recruitment process is, since we have representation from all geographic districts within Scarsdale, our procedure committee members would post individually out. We had common language that was drafted, and we could edit it and then post to our favorite Facebook groups. We all know Scarsdale Buzz and the like, to get the word out that we're looking for candidates and asking people to be part of the process and volunteer.
Can you tell whether you got more interest in response to the social media postings compared to all the other methods of recruiting?
So I equate posting to social media, especially like personally posting to the Edgewood Connects one, as another form of email. So people would contact you back, but they wouldn't necessarily post on the thread in social media. I think that something when it relates to running for or getting elected and running for a CNC position, that's something very personal. People appreciate the one-to-one conversation. So yes, it does create the awareness, whether it's posting in Scarsdale 10583 or the Inquirer or social media, but there's always that question back and that one-to-one conversation. And that's when people really generate interest in volunteering and performing civic duty.
In terms of your recruiting efforts, what, if anything, was the most frequently preferred reason for declining to run?
People don't have time.
Okay.
I know that the dedication for the CNC is very short, it's intense. So, and we plan the meetings very far in advance as part of the application of here's the meeting date and here is, you know, what your requirements are going to be. That's one. I think the second one is sometimes I feel that people are, maybe they don't want to get into the conflict, and they've seen a lot of conflict surrounding the nonpartisan way. And so that would be reason number two. But most often it's people don't have time. We're always going back to this. I mean, you'll see it, and we see it on the lovely faces that are on the Zoom. We have that target group of people that are always involved. We have to expand that circle. And that's really something we should do as a joint effort.
Now let's talk quickly about the election, which was held in the Scott Room this year as a result of the Village Hall no longer being available. Since you were able to resume in-person elections, did you consider having a drop box at the in-person polling site?
So that is an interesting question because having a drop box is the same as, I don't know, putting the ballot inside the boxes that were to the side of the room. So to us, I don't know if it would have made sense, whether it's a different mailbox that is outside, coming into the Scott room where we were positioned, where the boxes were, we were very socially distant. Everybody had masks on, sanitizer everywhere. If you haven't been into the Scott room, it is such a lovely experience compared to Village Hall's entryway. You know, we were very spread out, and it got people into the library, which I know a lot of people worked really hard to get that addition, like have that renovation built. So I felt like it was a win-win.
It was definitely a welcome site compared to the Village Hall lobby area. But the point about the Dropbox is for those who are not personally able to make it into the Scott room, instead of sending it in the mail and relying on the post office, knowing that the procedure committee has had a number of problems, not of your own making, but of the post office's making this year, that perhaps it was something that would be an alternative to getting it over to Chase, the Chase PO box. But it seems from your report that there were not any problems this year with the post office compared to years past.
I think there were two, the two ballots that came in they were postmarked before, but they came in after. And we checked the mailbox the last moment on election day. So they definitely came in the Wednesday and the Thursday after. So from a percentage basis, that's pretty good compared to previous years, but it's always something to look at. And how we vote takes up a lot of our conversations over the summer because we take it very seriously.
All right, my last question for you before I turn it over to the floor is about fundraising for next year. At last year's meeting, at this point in time, Madeline was telling us about a very successful fundraising effort with many donors of moderate sized donations that put you in a really good position for funding this year's election. And I understand from your report that you're in the process of beginning fundraising for next year. Can you tell us a little bit about your plans?
So our fundraising, it really keeps in mind that it is an unprecedented year. Again, we're using the same template and the same letter that we did last year, obviously updated, to solicit donations. The way that our bank account looks right now, we need support, but not a lot of support. We had some really good fundraising last year. So we are being respectful to the people that we solicit and saying, hey, if you're willing to give $10, $20, that would be great. But we're not pushing like we need a lot of money.
Thank you. All right, that is all for my questions. So I'd like to open it up to the floor for anyone who has any questions for Becky. And Alyssa, if you want to call on people, if people have their hands raised, their virtual hands raised. I'm looking and not seeing anything. Putting in a last call. Oh, we've got Michelle.
I just want to thank Becky for her presentation and her hard work. I was on the committee, so I know how hard she worked, and it really is. I guess one thing I find, maybe this is discussion later, but I find it disheartening. I don't think it's incorrect that Becky said people might avoid running for the CNC because of conflict, but if people think there won't be more conflict without the nonpartisan committee, that isn't true. But I'm not disagreeing with what Becky said. It's just a quandary on how we can better represent that service. It is phenomenal, but people are torn in so many different ways. And it has been, I think a lot of people are just very stretched thin these days. So I'm sorry, but mainly, Becky, thank you for a wonderful presentation and all the work that you've done this past year.
Yeah, I think that the conflicts is something for all of us, and it goes past the procedure committee. And I definitely would appreciate the League of Women Voters to really come to consensus on this. Is that what is the right way to have discussions? Like discussion, conflict, they kind of go hand in hand. The open discussion and the open dialogue is what makes the nonpartisan way really something different and something special. So maybe that's something to kind of think through.
Food for thought. Thank you. Any other questions? BK.
I see BK.
It's not so much a question, but an observation. I did not serve on the procedure committee. I have served on the procedure committee at many different times. And I'm always looking for new bodies to take on, a real commitment with respect to the work that the procedure committee does, because it really is the driving engine of the rest of the process throughout a year. So it's really necessary. It's a thankless job. However, I consider it a necessary job to continue to reassess the system. I had just two observations in terms of the questioning, Diane, and maybe Becky can tell me whether or not I was asked to try and help, especially as things got tighter and tighter, and we wanted to at least ensure, the procedure committee wanted to at least ensure that there would be no vacancies, as the CNC said, that no matter how much social media you think that you're trying to encourage, Twitter accounts, et cetera, getting on the various, social media networks, there is nothing that replaces the personal outreach, the actually, thinking of people who you think might be willing to give service and asking them personally. I have in the past never seen anything come out of the newspaper of press releases that have been done by the procedure committee, or somebody really waving their hand out there and and seeking to serve on the procedure committee. So it really is a deep dive each year to get people, on the CNC, to get I'm at the CNC, to get people to consider running, to thank them profusely when they do, to encourage them if they lose in a contested thing, that there's always the next year, and we hope that they'll stay engaged. And I certainly felt that was the experience this year. The other observation, Diane, with respect to drop boxes, well, unless you can ensure security, in which you got all sorts of stuff getting, put in a drop box situation, I wouldn't advise it. Plus, the resolution only has at this point, two ways in which one can vote. Either mail in, where there is some security, or coming in person to vote. So I find it hard to even conceive, given just elections in other forums with Republicans, Democrats, and everything else that are going, what is needed to have a drop box in place is another alternative. So I'll shut up now.
Thank you, BK. Anyone else have any questions?
Sorry, I just want to ask BK to clarify. When you said it was a deep dive, did you mean it was a deep dive by PC to get people to run for CNC, or for CNC to get people to run for trustee?
I'm sorry, no, I meant the deep dive. I'm not discussing anything but the procedure committee that runs the CNC election. It's a deep dive to get candidates for the CNC election.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Marjorie?
You're on mute.
Hi, everyone. I'm not a member of the League of Women Voters at this moment.
It's never
Consider-
too late.
I know, I would like to join. I've always gotten myself into too many things, but I'm new to the CNC and I've been trying to make calls, having difficulty sometimes finding the contact information or finding that it's old. But what the people I have talked to, what I'm getting is the time constraint is the number one reason for not participating. But I was wondering if you advocate making cold calls, because I don't know whether that's, calling people I don't know, whether that's effective. I was in sales for probably about 15 years, so I'm not afraid to make cold calls, but I don't know whether it will be effective. What do you think?
Becky, did you want to field that one?
Sure. I think when we start talking about cold calling, that is also something that we'd have to vet. If there's positives and negatives, again, trade-offs, right? Because contacting somebody out of the blue, it can be very helpful, especially if you know the person's work and you know that they are the right kind of fit. The downside to that is it could show bias, that we're trying to stack the CNC with like-minded people instead of having that diversity of thought. So by having people step forward, we have a lot of diversity that we can put into the process. So I think that's something where it's a great suggestion. We should definitely vet that and really circle around and have that discussion.
Also, it seems that more and more people don't use the phone, that people use email.
Yeah.
I know younger people, my daughter is 22, she thinks it's terrible to make a phone call. You have to use text messaging, or even email is kind of old fashioned for her. And so there are people I know who I could email but can't call or can't reach by phone, but I hesitated to do it by email.
It's true.
What do you think about that?
I think it's something that as a recruitment practice, we can definitely discuss, and it's a good suggestion.
Okay, thank you.
Great. If there are any other questions, I don't see any hands raised. So I would like to conclude today's information session, which again is open to the public and is being recorded and will be posted on the LWVS website shortly. But I want to extend a very, very great deal of thanks to Becky Bach for preparing for today's meeting, for participating and fielding all the questions today on the spot. I did not feed her any questions in advance that I posed today, so she was in the hot seat. And thank you for handling them all, for the thoroughness of your report that has been shared, and for your service on the procedure committee. So thank you again, everyone. And I will turn it back to Alyssa to talk about what comes next.
Okay. And yes, let me extend my thanks to you as well, Becky. It was such a thorough response. Really appreciate all your service and all you do for our village.
Well, let me just pop on here. I couldn't do this without the procedure committee and Madeline's support. So I'm the voice of the committee. It's really a team effort, and Madeline has done wonderful work for us today. So I really appreciate her support and the rest of the committee.
All right. Well, thank you so much. For our consensus, I guess I will stop the recording.